I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist.
This one is a bit of a mystery still, when my first tweet is going to happen.
Ken is fun, and Ken is a great friend to Barbie.
I call it catching the F train.
I was this fat unit, you know what I mean, in a suit, and it was clear that I was not the same as the others.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Better Marketing episode 16. And before we get to Professor Byron Sharp, which I'm really excited about, I just wanted to touch on how wonderful it was to all be together again at a conference in person. We were in Athens for the WFA Global Marketer Week, and I have to say the lineup of speakers was breathtaking, and I urge you all to dip in and have a look at what they were talking about, because as always there's so much to learn from everybody in this very fast changing world we all live in. And today we're going to learn from one of the great masters of the science of marketing, and having started the year focusing on the art of marketing, great to get the balance in. So without further ado, good evening Byron, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, it's lovely to be here.
Great. And how's things down under at the moment in the turbulent world we're in?
Down under as wonderful as it always is. No, we're about to go into winter, which we don't like that, but our winters are pretty mild.
It is indeed. I guess I wanted to start by, when I first read your book, How Brands Grow in 2010, I had that woeful feeling that I'd spent an entire career doing the wrong thing. But I'm glad to say I'm a fan of the science and the art of marketing, not just one. But how do you feel the impact of that book has gone? I mean, every time I talk to people, they remember the lessons from it. And do you see it enduring today? Are you still getting asked questions about it?
Oh yes. I mean, in its way, it's helped usher in the scientific revolution in marketing, which is nothing. That's happened to every single other discipline. But we've got a long way to go. There's a lot to still discover, and there's a lot of bad practices and things that we need to change. So I think I'll still be doing the same thing in 10, 20 years' time.
And as you've built the empirical data on which your laws of marketing are based, have you seen things flex and change? Because it's worth remembering, of course, in 2010, digital didn't have the all-consuming impact that it has in 2022.
I mean, these are fundamental laws about how brands compete and how buyers buy. The world doesn't, physicists don't, question the laws of physics just because we've got, new technology and things around. So no. How Brands Grow doesn't mention any media at all.
Your notion, whilst it doesn't mention media, it does mention what I'm going to call intelligent mass marketing. I think you call it something very similar.
Yeah, sophisticated mass marketing. What I mean is we need to reach all category buyers, but that doesn't mean you have to... The textbooks do this ridiculous parody sort of thing of mass marketing, that it was telling people that, you could, there would only be one... I don't think there's a company that's ever existed that's had one marketing mix. It's ridiculous. In our textbook, we point out that even the Model T Ford came with about 30 different variations. It was a silly cartoon caricature. So, we all do customization. When a salesperson says to you, do you want delivery? That is customization and a change in the marketing mix. We've always done that. But the shift in thinking was to move it towards that you do have to reach all category buyers, and maybe even people who aren't in your category yet. And at that time, indeed today, there's still a lot of marketers obsessed with trying to target tiny little niches and turn themselves into very small brands.
Yeah, I mean, I think your use of data, which I've seen many a time, to knock down some of the tenets of marketing, the notion of loyalty, for instance, and I particularly like your use of Harley Davidson, where you rip that to bits. Can you talk a little bit about how you see brand loyalty based on data?
Yeah, loyalty, it's something that I think a lot of people misunderstand about what the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute has discovered and things. I mean, loyalty is probably the most fundamental thing of consumer behavior. Consumers don't go searching around and and having huge repertoires. They don't randomly choose brands. Loyalty is very, very fundamental. It's just not the fall in love, Harley Davidson, get a tattoo type loyalty that we were apparently supposed to aspire to. Do you remember we used to talk about brand love and other ridiculous concepts? I mean, incredible arrogance to think that we could inject ourselves into the lives of millions of consumers on that sort of level. So yeah, the real world has a tendency to demolish fanciful marketing theories.
And what, in your view, is the most fanciful marketing theory? And does it perpetuate despite your evidence?
I think there's a big misunderstanding in the whole marketing industry about how advertising works, and muddling up advertising with what I would call product facilitation things. Like the very fact that we call search advertising is weird. I mean, it's not. It's like when someone types flight from Adelaide to Bali, and it's like someone walking up to a shelf and wanting to choose. That is completely different from advertising. But for ages, we've not known how advertising works. We thought it was like salespeople making persuasive arguments that shoved attitudes around. So those myths those misunderstandings are going to take a long time, I think, to dissipate. People still expect to run some advertising and see, for big brands and to try to see an instantaneous return, and to see market share bouncing around. And when they're frustrated with that, they waste money on marketing mix modeling to try to tease it out and find it. This is all nonsense if you understand how advertising works, but that will take a long time.
And when it comes to, I like your rubbishing of brand love. I once sat with my then team in the bank talking about the purpose of our function. So not brand purpose, I promise you. And what we ended up with was our job was to make people like the bank. Now the bank I'm talking about here was RBS, and that featured the brand people wanting to create brand love, the corporate affairs people wanting to make sure people hated us less, and the research people wanting to make sure it was all empirically based. And it was an internal comms fella who actually said, I've got an idea, shouldn't we just say that we're here to make people like the bank? Which I thought was a lovely demonstration of the disciplines of marketing all coming together in one go. And actually it's the cohesive effort that makes things work. But perhaps banking we could focus on a little bit here, because the notion of loyalty in banking, I always used to challenge in that I think people confuse inertia with loyalty. The fact that your customers haven't left you doesn't mean that they're loyal.
I don't get too fussed about sort of attitudinal based things. I mean, people's behaviour is what matters, and we see in banking, people they're not 100% loyal, but they have small repertoires. They make decisions quickly. That looks very similar to other categories. It's amazing in banking how bankers have such a poor understanding of their own data. Like they're obsessed with things like customer satisfaction. You look at their customer satisfaction scores; they're actually really quite high. I love pointing out in Australia that there is a class of banks that are the customer satisfaction leaders, right, by far. They stand above all the banks. They're credit unions. They also have lowest loyalty. Yeah. And yet, you have these bankers saying, if we can only nudge the satisfaction score up a little bit, we'll earn this incredible loyalty. Like, well, credit unions have already got it, and they have lower loyalty. It's funny that, isn't it? And you can see, that's been sitting in your data. Surely that's been sitting in your tracking reports for the last 40 years. How did you miss that?
So do you find at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute today, are people coming to you to ask for help on their data and how to look at it? Or, what's happening with clients and you?
Yes. I mean, we have a lot of companies sponsor the Institute, which is lovely of them, and that allows us to keep on making discoveries and, provides food for our PhDs and things. But they want to do that because they're trying to transform their marketing to become a bit more evidence-based. I was talking to a retailer the other day, and I said, "It's lovely, you make do these presentations. It's a bit like the bank example. You make presentations to supermarket chains, and and show them that the 50% of baskets are 6 items or less. And you get this like, what? Really? Really? I mean, we're so geared up for the heavy baskets. You go, well, they're not the norm. Now, where did you get this data? I'm like, off your till registers. And so that is an example of organisations do have data, but they're clearly not, they don't have an evidence-based culture. They don't know how to use it. Myths just keep hanging around, like a very senior, well-paid banker can say something like, if we improve satisfaction, we will improve loyalty. And no one will challenge them on it, and yet they've got their own data that suggests that isn't the case. Yes. So we're sort of like part of the work we do is sort of like vaccines against bad ideas and old myths.
I remember reading Rees and Trout when I first entered the business, and for a long while they were they were the kind of Bible of marketing. And today there are some lovely conflicting academic views of marketing, which is what makes academia such an interesting thing to follow. But I guess what I want to get to is, what are the laws that you have seen? I mean, they were talking about some of their immutable laws. I mean, I like very much your notion of mental availability and physical availability. And perhaps search advertising is more about physical availability. You're just looking for something.
Yes.
How would you compare your laws to where we started reading?
To Rees and Trout's. I've written a nice review, I think, of Rees and Trout's 22 Immutable Laws, where I say it's a book that's very easy to criticise. It starts off talking about scientific laws and then presents 22 laws that aren't scientific laws, which shows they think laws are thou shalt, like religious type laws. Scientific laws are patterns that keep repeating, so you can have confidence in them. An engineer doesn't arrive in Brazil and say, what's Brazilian gravity like? Escape velocity is predictable, boiling point of water is predictable by what your altitude. We know these things, and that's what scientific laws do. Rees and Trout's are more like, some of them just platitudes, but some of them are like, tentative hypotheses. But there are a couple in there that are sort of interesting. They claim that you have to own a particular point. That's their one big idea, right? Of the positioning ladder. That's worthy, I think, of some research. You can instantly think of counterexamples to it, though. Al Rees is infamous for predicting that the iPhone would fail. I think that's because it was a device that brought together things, and his view was to know the world becomes more and more specialised with each brand holding that position. I think he's removed the post, actually. But so the stuff we do is very, very different. We're really old-fashioned scientists where we look for patterns. So we don't set out to sort of demolish myths. It's just the real world the real world is a weird place, and I think every discipline's learned this. You can get a whole lot of really clever people in a room who can delude themselves. They can have these ideas about the way the world works, but when you go out and look at it, no, it's not the case.
But perhaps my favourite of your laws is indeed the one that sounds like a Hollywood movie, the double jeopardy law. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's the most famous marketing law, though that used to be a joke, sort of a geek joke, because none of the laws are very famous. It's discovered actually first in attitudinal data for TV personalities. It basically says that less popular items have much smaller customer bases, and this is the double jeopardy, and they're less well liked, or they get slightly less loyalty, which is actually weird. It is actually quite weird, but we see it everywhere. Everything from, as I say, it started off. It was actually, I think it was NBC. I think the first analysis was done in the United States. They were discovered they could bring a new. It was back in the days when TV was a bit like radio, and you had TV personalities, and whenever they brought a new personality on, that person was, when they do a survey, have you heard of David so and so? Obviously, if a person's new, fewer people say yes, but those who did say yes, they would then say, do you like them? And the liking scores would always be a bit lower, and so it's like, we can never have someone new. Whenever we get someone new that, and then clever researcher Jack Landis realised that this is just always happens. It's an effect, and we have to adjust for it. And then later on, we learned this appears everywhere. It has very profound implications for brand growth. I mean, you cannot write a brand plan that says I'm going to grow, but I'm going to do so without expanding the size of my customer base. You cannot write a brand plan that says I'm not going to look at our light buyers. I'm not going to try to attract light category buyers. I mean, you can write this, sorry. I mean, of course you can write this, but that just will not happen. I remember a very senior banker here in Australia who once said for the Westpac Bank, said, Westpac doesn't need any more customers. We're going to grow because we're just going to get more out of our customers. We'll do cross-selling and things like that. And I thought, well, you can say that, but you're just going to shrink.
Yeah. Well, the share of wallet, maybe you have to do. It's an and world, isn't it? It's not one or the other.
Share of wallet's pretty predictable.
Yeah.
You predict it from brand size, and bigger banks who have more products and more physical availability get a bit more share of wallet. But the share of wallet hardly varies. Do you remember Wells Fargo used to make claims that they were cross-selling awesome leaders, that they were, I think, typical bank in America had about 2-point-something products per customer, and they were up to like 5 or 6, and were heading for 8. That was their corporate goal. And we published a report saying they must be gaming the metrics or something. I thought they were just doing something like putting pressure on their mid-level bankers to hit these targets. So they did things like, an FPOS card is not really just one product. It's an FPOS card plus the account, so we'll count that as 2. I thought they were doing that. Turned out they were doing fraud on a massive scale. It's cost billions of dollars in compensation for Wells Fargo. They're still under terrible scrutiny because of this. Because, people were they were opening fake accounts to hit these targets because you couldn't do it. You can't. It is a law-like pattern. You'll get about the same loyalty as other brands of your size. That's what Double Jeopardy tells us, which means to grow, you need to expand the size of your customer base. And this is really counter to the whole sort of fashion of trying to get high ROI and nice targeting and not having any wastage in your advertising of talking to people with a low propensity to buy. This says, no, you have to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it kind of triggers a couple of thoughts I'd love to probe with you. I mean, if you look at the platforms of conferences today, you can't do a marketing conference without somebody, I was about to be Ritson-esque and swear, about talking about challenger brands and what you need to do to be a challenger brand. I mean, what do you think of the whole challenger brand space on the one hand, and on the other hand, this notion of disruption, which is going to change everything for everybody, which I also see not to be true in the data. And I know I'm kind of adding a couple of things together there, but I'd love your thoughts on challenger brands and when people talk about disruption.
The whole disruption thing, well, that's just that's the dream, isn't it? It's like saying I'm going to make this video and I hope it goes viral. I hope I'm going to come up with a new product that's going to totally disrupt the category. But of course, those things are quite rare. It's wonderful when it happens. Little company, some guys out of where were they? Stanford, was it? They came up with a search engine thingy and went, wow, this would be really useful to the world and it would attract lots of eyeballs. And they were clever enough to think, we shouldn't charge for this. We could probably just use it as a platform to sell advertising. But that doesn't happen very often. Most of us will be working, I work for a university, this is a 1,000-year-old category.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, of course, is the algorithms haven't helped any of this. So your Double Jeopardy law, when you look at how the algorithms deal with that, makes it even worse. So if you're a small brand, the availability is tough on you.
It's always been harder. It's always hard for all brands. But then again, on the flip side, if you're a big brand, you're probably thinking the only way is down. So yes, we'd all like to not, it's terrible. We do moan a lot at marketing conferences and things, don't we? Whenever I hear marketers moaning about consumer loyalty is disappearing, what they're really saying is we've got competitors now. I really wouldn't like to have competitors. Well, sure, but I'm afraid you will have competitors.
Yes, it's a bit like agencies talking about what a nuisance clients are.
Or academics saying this university would be a great place, wouldn't it, except for all these annoying students around. Yes.
And then can I ask you again, when you look at customer experience, which is much talked about, and removing the pain points and improving the customer experience, what are you thinking when you're listening to that, and what's your view of the data on that?
This is good. We as I said, consumers naturally loyal if we don't make it hard for them, and we don't disrupt them, and we get our brand name into their heads. Infrequently purchased categories have a great problem with this, even when consumers buy them, they don't. Do you know what brand of microwave you have? Yeah, that's terrible, right? So that's one of the things that advertising is to do, is to remind, and then when you need a new durable appliance, you might buy the same brand again if it's in your head. So we, removing the pain points is a good thing to do with customer experience.
An interesting thing. I should point out that I don't own a microwave, just for those that might have been interested. This notion of getting staff to do a better job, I have seen to be true, by the way, and I have seen that with training and hiring the right kind of people, you can have better frontline staff. That
Sure.
alone doesn't help, because they're usually not enabled by the tech behind them, and the older the bank, the bigger that problem is. That's another straightforward law of it.
It's very hard. It's very complicated, and that's why if you look at satisfaction scores for banks, they're typically they're actually pretty good. They're something like 6.8 out of 10, and they sit there and they're pretty much very close to what competitors are, and they track along. There are no there's no superstar bank that is super loved. Bizarrely, bank satisfaction scores go up with changes in the weather and interest rates. Which
Well,
was
that one
nothing.
I know. I hadn't actually seen the weather change. I know
Right.
that one from my Coca-Cola days, but the
Right. Yeah.
satisfaction scores go up. Is that a general thing across all categories, though? Weather is better. We all like things more.
Yeah, I think it just shows that they don't actually just measure service interactions. If you really want to measure service interactions, you're much better to have hard measures, like how many minutes did it take us to answer the phone, how many days does it take us to process a mortgage thing, and work at improving those.
What I wanted to ask you, Byron, was when you look at categories, which category do you consider to be the best user of the things that you're helping everybody learn?
Not banking.
Yeah. I should also point out that I'm not a banker. I'm something very close to that, but I'm not a banker.
No. There are industries that are more sophisticated than others. That have the industries where there is lots of competition, where there's a realization. I remember Jim Koch from Boston Beer saying to me, a famous American entrepreneur, built Boston Beer Company. Very early on, he realized, I'm spending more on advertising than I am on hops. So this is pretty important. I better learn about this stuff. And so, certain industries like that are more sophisticated. The great brands that have been built in the world, of course, have been ones who have been successfully rolled out mental and physical availability. And many of those had, arrival of mass, national media, and then international media. Wow. Chain stores, and then global chain stores. That's where you see more marketing sophistication. Well, I remember, and it was quite a long time ago, but I remember the first visit to Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, and I said, you do realize that, in marketing textbooks, you're held up as the greatest marketers on the planet. And all these people looked at me and went, what? It's like a big surprise to them. They were like, what? No, the chemists run this company. So, we can always do better.
things that have been popular in recent times, the notion of brand purpose, for instance. What's your, when you listen to that, what's your view?
Well, as a scientist, I'm always worried when I see people leaping onto bandwagons, and particularly, like I have a seminar actually I give for PhD candidates with lots of examples of how good intentions can actually corrupt science. There are academics who, fraud, make up data and things like that. Every industry has some bad people, but good people can fool themselves as well. And so I worry that people are fooling themselves over brand purpose because no one wants to question it, because it's about doing good things. So we've got a research project in the institute at the moment where we're just looking at the empirical claims that people make for brand purpose, that it makes consumers more loyal, that it differentiates the brand, that it delivers brand growth, that it might deliver a price premium, whatever. We're looking at all these different claims and seeing how it stacks up. So at the moment I put it in the fashion fad category, but with good intentions. But good intentions can still be wrong. It's a terrible thing that most of the terrible dictators of this world who ended up killing, millions and millions of people, they had good intentions. They thought they were actually saving the world.
Yes, they were believing their own BS though, weren't they, in the process? That's one of the problems, I think, in general. And then, I'm a big fan of the data that Binet and Field used to evidence, needing to get the balance between the long term and the short term right. Have you seen that in your data as well? Because this is, oft used in deployment of budget, for instance.
Well, we've actually just recently released a report to our sponsors, which says there's a lot of very woolly thinking in this area. There is no magic 60-40 formula. That wasn't, and it wasn't even in the original report from Les and Peter said there is no, you could see on a line, right? You could use in the data, it's weird data in the first place. It's award submissions, but there was no difference between businesses that used 80% advertising to businesses who used 20% advertising. It was a flat line. But then I think they got a lot of pressure back. There is a marketing law, wherever there is demand, there will be supply. And it's a great demand for, give us a figure. And I think the advertising industry would have loved a figure that said you have to spend 80% on advertising and 20% on in-store and purchase facilitation and price promotions and things. But they thought that wasn't really believable, so they went for something a little bit more believable, like 60-40. But there is no set rule for that. It depends hugely on the categories. If you're selling Persian rugs, which people buy hardly ever, like maybe once in their life, and virtually know no brands whatsoever, and are not interested in the category until they are, it makes a lot of sense to have a sales sign outside your door every single day. And that be your, purchase facilitation or, Google search advertising would take up the vast bulk of your budget and for good reasons.
I'm hovering because I think presence marketing, as the Coca-Cola company used to call it, became a thing.
Okay, I'm struggling for a term because that's interesting, presence marketing, because activation is a terrible word. It suggests that, you can run a, 20% off lawnmowers this week and that actually activates people. It doesn't activate anyone who wasn't going to buy a lawnmower. So it's not activation, but it's when people are in the buying mode. How much of that should you do? And obviously, for most brands, it's going to be, I'm going to have to do some of that. Right? I want to catch people just as they're falling, as they're typing into Google. I want to catch them. As they're walking into the store, I want to catch them. Yeah, I'm going to do some of that. But I'm also going to do some advertising because I know, if I'm selling cars, I hopefully should know that the average is that people look at two brands. When people look at two, and I'm one of the two, I would like to get at least 50% of those. And I'll use my presence marketing, I'll make my dealerships good, to get that. But my main battle is to be in the two. And how do I do that? Well, that's the decade of advertising that I did previously.
and to kind of add the world we're in today, a fantastic presentation that Ivan Pollard did at the WFA back in 2017 when he was at the Coca-Cola company, and they'd been through one of those phases when somebody must have sold them the Kool-Aid from Facebook, where they were going, you don't need all those signs in stores because we can target people when they're walking in and we know who to target. And what the data showed was, what's the technical term, that was utter horseshit, that you do, the signs work, the history of Coke and its advertising works, and actually if you repeat, you can't go that far wrong with doing that. But it is interesting because, when I used to spend time with the chemists, one of the first tricks they did to me was to show the perception of taste that your eyes causes. So a blind taste test of something you can see as opposed to something you can't elicits a different result. So even the science of taste is interesting.
Yes. Well, we trust our eyes.
Yeah.
We're very visual creatures. We trust our eyes far more than a very weird thing of tasting blind. Yes.
I think I understand branding, but when I'm talking to you, I'm glad to find myself questioning everything I've based my thinking on.
Well,
but
that's good.
What's your view of how to build a brand? And when brand people are talking to you, and I'm using that word specifically rather than just to talk about marketing, what's your view of brand building and how people are doing these days, and whether it's worth it at all?
Oh, it's very worth it, because pretty much outside of mining and things, there are no big businesses in this world that aren't built on brands. So there's a lot of mystique and mysticism about brands, whereas brand equity is basically mental and physical availability. Everything else is trivial. And some people go, oh, is it that simple? Well, it's that simple. It's that complicated. Mental and physical availability is not easy to build amongst millions or billions of people, and to have it overlapping. So it's particularly a problem for small brands to get that overlap. Not to win some retail space, but most of the people who go into the store don't see you. Okay, order to get in front and get into people's heads, but then they go, well, why do you never buy us? Well, you're not in any of the places I go shopping. To get that overlap, and that is why big brands are hard to dislodge from markets, because they have built brand equity, which is mental and physical availability. It's a great challenge. It's very exciting for marketing, though, I think, that those two assets, which, apart from patents and systems and other things, which are very valuable, but really for most companies, those two assets are where the value of the company lies. And marketing plays a huge, huge role. I know some CEOs I've talked to are quite horrified by that. They're like, I get it, mental and physical availability is most of the value of this company, but I'm a bit horrified to think that marketing is mostly in charge of those things.
Well, and perhaps that's because there hasn't been enough use of the science of marketing to help CEOs understand that side of it. But as I say, I've always believed in the science and the art and the healthy mix of both. But
can I talk on this, because I think people somehow think that science and creativity are opposites, which is very weird. I mean, science just tells you about the real. I think it was a Unilever director who said to me once, I want my staff to argue about the creative stuff, but I do not want them to argue about real-world empirical questions like how do consumers behave, what day of the store do they go into, how do their eyes move in the store. I mean, that stuff we should know. If we don't know, we go find out, and then we don't have any arguments about it. But you can argue about the creative. I need to increase my penetration. Well, but this work better than this. That's where the creativity comes in. There's no conflict. I think a lot of creative people, when they say they don't like science, what they really mean is they don't like the engineers. They don't like the ad tech and people playing around with numbers and things like that. Well, these are not scientists. These are engineers.
Yes, and they've also positioned themselves as scientists. I know in your TED talk, you do a beautiful job of explaining, that the world was once totally unscientific, and even medicine was. So
Oh, yeah.
for those of you who haven't seen Byron's TED Talk, please look. Absolutely well worth it. And as we come to the kind of close here, a couple of things I'd like to just check with you before I ask you the final question. I've always talked about an important metric being brand preference, which, when I think of that through the scientific lens, seems to me to be measuring this notion of mental availability, and with a little soupçon of maybe emotional attachment. What's your view on brand preference as a metric?
Yeah, I mean, you would. Yeah, it's going to largely pick up their behaviour. I think it was a psychologist in the BIM 1967. That's right. He went. When I say I like apples, what I'm saying is, I eat quite a lot of apples. We look back, so it's not necessarily as a metric is unfortunately not terribly. We already sort of know it from our. It tells us how many customers we have and how big we are in their repertoires, but it works like that. So in markets where you don't have easy access to Nielsen type panel data and things, a survey that just asks something like brand preference will tell you. It's not something you need to track very often though, unless like sales have gone down or something. But you're right. It is what I think we used to think brand preference told us about some sort of strong attitude or something. What it's more reporting is the size of the brand in people's heads and in their lives.
Yeah, and then because these things are often sold by management consultants, that one number thing that everybody obsesses about. Can you speak to that? And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I think it was Bain that pretty much drove the whole focus on NPS.
Bain have where I was Reichheld at Bain. I mean, he has a terrible track record of coming up with fake stuff that's packaged beautifully, and somehow a lot of people believe it. So he was the guy who sold the idea that we could get zero defection. You could get 100% loyalty, and the idea that a tiny change in loyalty would deliver huge profits. And yeah, I hopefully demolished that in the book of just pointing out that if anyone who read the article realizes it's just sleight of hand. I mean, they don't really hide it. They don't hide that they have no data. That the whole thing is based on a thought experiment. But then he said he had a revelation that he'd been pushing satisfaction and loyalty too much, and really there was just what we really have to ask people is whether they would recommend it. And this is the Net Promoter Score. And people thought that tells you something about word of mouth. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't tell you anything about word of mouth. It just says it's basically it's a satisfaction measure by a different name, and but with an equation that makes it bounce around a lot, which I think market research consultancies like, because they like figures that bounce around, because no one wants to report that the figure's the same as it was last week or last quarter and the quarter before that and quarter before that. My colleague John Dawes has done some fantastic analysis on it, showing how volatile it is, and it's terrible. But this whole nonsense of one metric type thing, silver bullet, it's very lazy thinking, isn't it? Marketing isn't that easy. If it was, marketers could all be replaced with algorithms, and we could all go home. Yeah, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And anyone who's saying that things, algorithms or artificial intelligence is, going to do wonderful. I love to point out we haven't even got smart traffic lights yet. We haven't even got traffic lights that can safely go, I'm going to turn green for you because there's no cars coming the other way. Most artificial intelligence looks rubbish. Or go onto Amazon and see the recommendations that they make for you. Yeah, they're terrible. And Amazon's got very big computers and very bright data scientists. And for me, they recommend that I should buy a book called How Brands Grow.
Well, I presume you bought several of them to give away free at conferences, so they may not be wrong.
I have. Sometimes, it's easier to use Amazon to deliver it than someone else. But, their page can't even pick up that I'm the author of the book.
Well, in general, we at the WFA have long questioned the data that's wheeled out by the platforms as though it were empirical evidence. It's sales data, and it's their sales data. And actually, I think everybody needs to bear that in mind. And can I just say, what a delight to talk to you. I could ask you endless questions, because I think, what you've caused in the world of marketing is the questioning of things that we all believed. And for that, I would personally say thank you. And thank you very much for the time you've given us today. But I guess I'd like to end where, on the notion, if I were to ask you, what would you tell any marketer, what is the single thing they need to do better to serve the company they work for better?
Become evidence-based and explain that to your CEO and your CFO, who are very intelligent people and will get it, and say, we're making these improvements because of this evidence, and judge me on that.
Yeah.
Don't do this. We do this heroic thing in marketing where we say, judge us entirely on like sales or market share. And, if I'm the CEO, I go, yeah, you're not the only people who determine that. And there's things like the global economy and competitors. And I'm sorry, when our sales go up, everyone claims credit.
Yeah.
Sales team, the marketing team, the R&D people, you all do. I'm not falling for that. In the factory, they tell me about really sensible things that they're trying to achieve, like lower wastage rates, lower electricity, fewer defects, and I judge them on that. Marketing people, I'm waiting for you to come and tell me about those things.
So Byron, just to wrap this, the one piece of advice you would give a marketeer in order to be a better marketeer, what would it be?
It's to become evidence-based, to set targets in line with what we know about how the world works, get sign-off from your CEO and CFO that you're on the right track, and then let them leave you to get on with the creative business of hitting those, working in line with the laws.
Fantastic. Well, listen, Byron, what an absolute pleasure to spend time listening to you, and thank you for the book, which is, as I said, caused me to question all sorts of things. And for anybody who hasn't read it, I urge you to. Awful lot to learn. And for those that haven't seen the little face-off between one of our previous guests, Professor Mark Ritson, I suggest you have a look at that too, because it reminds us all there's a lot to question in marketing. Thank you very much, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I certainly found it humbling, always fascinating to listen to an academic tearing up your own textbook. But hey, next month, I can promise you something very different as we get Susan Akkad from Estee Lauder to come and talk to us. She's VP of Cultural Innovation, and that certainly has me wonder what on earth it is she does. Have a great month. Take care.